Goji, Ajukui,
That's how it ended.
Atis Nekatagi.
The end. I would have loved that too. There we go. So that was The Last Guardian. Thank you, Fumito Ueda-san. Well, I didn't cry, but I came very close in those final moments. Pros. Story was good. Twist was cool. Progression was interesting because it was always a very, like, there were always, like, landmarks that were constantly visible. And so as you progressed through the space, your progression was also very visible, which I thought was a really cool, interesting way of doing that, because in games like for instance in other Team Eco games, in Shadow of the Colossus there isn't really that sense of like progression. You travel far distances, but it's kind of like a Hyrule Field style, like just like a big plane that you travel along to different locations and you find the Colossi. And then with Eco, with their first game, it was similarly structured to this, in that it was all in one place and you were getting from kind of the bottom of the area to the top, but the scope was never shown, so that was cool. It did seem like this game was meant to be a combination of elements of Eco and Shadow of the Colossus. I think it was very successful in that combination. Both of those games also were very sad and explored very like mature themes in a very interesting way. I think these kind of games are good for video games. It is good to have sad, mature stories told in the medium. There are not very many, and I think the things that video games do well, like the interactivity element to it, like that's why we play games, right? If we wanted to be passive, we watch a movie, we watch a TV show, we read a book, we have the story told to us. But with a game, like, we want some element of interactivity, even if ultimately the story is still crafted to be experienced in the same way every time, more or less, without any kind of great variations. There are obviously some examples of games that don't do that, but for the most part games are still like static narratives that we experience from start to finish, with a middle that is like more or less uniform. So I think what this game does is it really plays with that interactivity by making not only your character interactive, but having this other like supplementary character that's also interactive on like a different level, like a sub-level, and that being the challenge. But getting this creature to do what you want it to do is obviously something that's been done in games before, but not, I don't think, to this narrative end, and I think that's cool. So those are the good things. It also looks beautiful looking game, gorgeous. There was never a moment where I was like, this sucks. There are a couple of frame rate drops, but like, whatever, I don't care. It was built to be a PS3 game to begin with. It just took so long that it ended up being a PS4 game by default. The bad, there were some pretty not fun bits to play. And I think, unfortunately, in spite of how much I like that it was a very simple game, that simplicity meant that it was quite repetitive. A lot of the puzzles that needed to be solved, it was the same solution that I'd seen plenty of times before. By the end, there wasn't really much that was like stumping me. There were a couple of stumpers that were very environmental, which was cool. It wasn't obtuse puzzle design. It was all very naturalistic. So I guess that was good too. But yeah, the water sequence, like that whole section, not good. And the fighting those golems was fine. I wish there was more I could have done, but I guess leaving the combat primarily to Trico is like that's like the point, right? He's the big guy that helps you, and you're the little guy that squeezes into small places. Love that dynamic. I love the big friend, little buddy dynamic. Kind of reminded me of like Last of Us in that way, like the Joel and Ellie dynamic of one being very like swift and nimble and small, and the other being strong and beefy and powerful. And I guess those are my thoughts as the credits end. And I hope we get a cool post-credit sequence where we find out that Trico is fine. And if we don't, then I'm gonna scream. Oh, and this is the image we see at the beginning of... This is on the menu, the opening menu, this image here. So if this is a reveal now, it's the shield in the dirt. It's gonna pan back out, right?